Right now, as you listen to this, you are probably convinced that you are a separate person, sitting somewhere, having thoughts about what I am saying. This seems so obviously true that questioning it feels almost silly. After all, there you are, and here I am, two distinct beings having a conversation across space and time. But have you ever noticed what happens in those rare moments when this certainty suddenly cracks? Maybe you are walking in the woods, and suddenly the trees are not separate from you anymore. Maybe you are listening to music, and you disappear into the sound completely. Or perhaps you are simply washing dishes when everything becomes strangely unified, and for just an instant, there is no one washing anything. These moments terrify most people, not because they are frightening in themselves, but because they threaten the most fundamental assumption we have about reality. They suggest that this person you take yourself to be might be something like a mirage, beautiful, convincing, but ultimately a play of light and shadow. What we call a spiritual awakening is really just the moment when this mirage begins to shimmer and fade. You start to see through the elaborate game of pretending to be a separate self in a world of separate things. It is like waking up from a dream and realizing you were never really the character in the dream at all. Now, you might think this sounds wonderful, this waking up. And in a way it is. But here is what nobody tells you about spiritual awakening. It is not a pleasant, gradual transition from ignorance to wisdom. It is more like being in a house of cards when someone starts pulling out the bottom layer. Everything you thought you knew about yourself and your world begins to wobble and collapse. The people who survive this collapse and the people who do not have one crucial difference. But to understand what that difference is, we need to look at why the collapse happens in the first place. Because what is really dying in a spiritual awakening is not your true nature. What is dying is the story you have been telling yourself about who and what you are. And most people would rather die than let that story go. There is something peculiar about human beings that you will not find in cats or trees or mountains. We are the only creatures who spend most of our lives believing in a story about ourselves that is not actually happening. A cat does not think, I am Fluffy, a tabby cat with certain personality traits and a complicated relationship with my owner. A cat simply cats. But you and I, we have constructed elaborate narratives. I am John, a 42-year-old accountant who grew up in Ohio, has trouble with commitment, and really should exercise more. We walk around inside these stories like actors who have forgotten they are on stage. The story becomes so convincing that we think it is reality itself. This story is not wrong, exactly. It is just incomplete. It is like mistaking a map for the territory it describes. The map can be useful, even necessary, but it is not the actual landscape. When you have a spiritual awakening, you suddenly see the landscape itself, and you realize you have been living inside a map. Now, this would be fine if we held our stories lightly, like a loose garment we could put on or take off as needed. But we do not. We grip our personal story with desperate intensity. We defend it, improve it, worry about it, compare it to other people's stories. We have mistaken this story for our actual life. So when awakening begins to dissolve the boundaries of your story, when you start to see that this separate self is more like a convenient fiction, your mind goes into full alarm mode. Every psychological defense system you have developed over decades springs into action. Because from the story's point of view, awakening looks like death. And in a very real sense, it is death. The death of everything you thought you were. The death of your problems, your achievements, your personality, your past, your future. Not because these things literally disappear, but because you see they were never as real or as important as you believed. Most people cannot tolerate this kind of death. Even when they intellectually understand it might be liberation, they would rather return to the familiar prison of their story than face the vastness of what they actually are. And this is where the real trouble begins. Have you ever been on a boat in calm water when the fog suddenly lifts? One moment you are surrounded by a cozy, gray cocoon where everything feels close and manageable. The next moment you are staring at an endless expanse of ocean, and you realize how small your little vessel really is. That is what happens when spiritual awakening begins to strip away your familiar reference points. Your entire life, you have been navigating by landmarks that you thought were solid and permanent. Your name, your history, your relationships, your goals, your fears. These gave you a sense of location in the world. You knew where you were because you knew who you were. But awakening reveals that these landmarks are more like clouds than mountains. They shift and change and sometimes disappear entirely. This is profoundly disorienting. Imagine trying to find your way home and all the street signs keep changing. Your mind, which has spent decades organizing reality around the assumption of your separate existence, suddenly has no reliable way to navigate. The very ground of being that you took for granted turns out to be more like quicksand. Most people respond to this groundlessness by frantically trying to rebuild the landmarks as quickly as possible. They grab onto new spiritual concepts, new identities, new practices. I am an awakened being. I am consciousness itself. I am one with everything. But these are just new stories, new maps. They might feel more expansive than the old ones, but they are still attempts to create solid ground where there is none. The problem is that the awakening process is not finished with you yet. It will dissolve these new spiritual identities just as efficiently as it dissolved your old personal ones. And each time you try to create new ground to stand on, awakening will pull the rug out from under you again. This can go on for years. You build a new understanding of yourself. Awakening demolishes it. You find a new teacher or teaching. Awakening shows you its limitations. You think you have figured out how to be spiritual. Awakening reveals the absurdity of trying to be anything at all. It is like being in a cosmic game of whack-a-mole, where every concept you pop up gets immediately whacked down. This is why so many people either go slightly mad during awakening or retreat back into their old stories as quickly as possible. They cannot stand the groundlessness that is actually the most natural state of being. Now, here is where things get really interesting, and also where most people take a wrong turn that leads them away from genuine awakening rather than toward it. When your old identity starts crumbling, you naturally look around for something to replace it with. And what do you find? An entire spiritual marketplace ready to sell you a new and improved version of yourself. You can become a meditator, a yogi, a seeker of enlightenment. You can collect spiritual experiences like stamps in an album. You can learn to speak in mystical language and wear flowing clothes and eat only organic vegetables. You can join communities of like-minded souls who will validate your new spiritual identity and help you feel special and evolve. This spiritual shopping spree can be tremendous fun. It feels like you are growing and expanding and becoming someone more interesting than your old, ordinary self. But what is actually happening is that you are rebuilding the prison of separate selfhood with more attractive materials. You are simply trading a mundane story for a spiritual story, but you are still living in a story. The spiritual identity can be even more seductive than the ordinary one, because it promises to be the final identity, the one that will make you permanently happy and wise. It offers to solve the fundamental problem of being human. But here is the secret that the spiritual marketplace does not want you to discover. The fundamental problem of being human is not actually a problem that needs solving. You see, the spiritual ego is far more subtle and persistent than the ordinary ego. The ordinary ego knows it is limited and flawed, but the spiritual ego believes it is unlimited and pure. It has found God, realized truth, achieved enlightenment, and this makes it much harder to see through, because it wraps itself in the language of transcendence while remaining fundamentally the same old game of being a separate somebody. Most people get so caught up in becoming spiritual that they never actually become free. They spend years or decades perfecting their spiritual persona, collecting insights and experiences and practices, all while the real transformation that awakening offers remains out of reach. Because real awakening is not about becoming somebody new. It is about recognizing that you were never anybody in the first place. There is something wonderfully human about our need to find someone who has figured it all out. When your world is falling apart and nothing makes sense anymore, meeting someone who radiates certainty and wisdom feels like finding an oasis in the desert. Finally, someone who can show you the way home. This is how most people stumble into what I call the guru trap. They meet a teacher, or read a book, or attend a retreat, and suddenly everything clicks. The teacher's words resonate with something deep inside. Their presence feels like coming home. Their teachings offer a map through the chaos of awakening, and so you become a follower. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with learning from someone who has walked the path before you. But notice what happens in your mind when you find your teacher. You immediately recreate the same relationship pattern that got you into trouble in the first place. You make them the knower and yourself the seeker. They have what you want, and your job is to get it from them. This dynamic feels spiritual and humble, but it is actually a continuation of the same old game. Instead of being a separate self in relationship to the world, you are now a separate seeker in relationship to enlightenment. Instead of trying to improve your ordinary life, you are trying to achieve a spiritual life. The fundamental structure of separation remains intact. The most dangerous part of the guru trap is not that teachers might be fraudulent or manipulative, though some certainly are. The most dangerous part is that even genuine teachers can become obstacles to your awakening if you relate to them as authorities who possess what you lack. Because here is what no guru can give you: the recognition of what you already are. They can point toward it, describe it, create conditions where you might notice it. But the actual seeing has to happen in you, as you, by the deepest intelligence of your own being. No one else can have your awakening for you. Yet most people spend years trying to get their teacher to do exactly that. They want to be awakened by someone else rather than awaken as themselves. They want to be saved rather than realize they were never actually in danger. And the teacher, no matter how wise, cannot give them what they think they want without preventing them from discovering what they actually are. Have you ever noticed how spiritual people love to talk about their experiences? The visions, the bliss states, the moments of cosmic consciousness, the encounters with divine beings. It is like a spiritual version of showing vacation slides. And here is where I dissolved into pure light, and this is when I realized I was one with everything. These experiences can be genuinely transformative and beautiful. I'm not suggesting they are meaningless or that you should ignore them. But watch what happens when you start collecting spiritual experiences like trophies. You begin to evaluate your spiritual progress based on how many extraordinary states you have accessed. No visions lately? You must be doing something wrong. No bliss states? Better try a different practice. This turns awakening into a kind of spiritual materialism. Instead of accumulating money or possessions, you accumulate peak experiences. Instead of trying to impress people with your car or house, you try to impress them with your mystical adventures. The ego simply relocates to higher ground, but it is still the same old ego. The real trap of experience collecting is that it keeps you focused on what is temporary and changing rather than what is always already here. Spiritual experiences come and go like weather patterns. They are movements within consciousness, not consciousness itself. But when you become fascinated by the movements, you miss the stillness in which they appear. It is like being so interested in the waves that you forget about the ocean. The waves are beautiful and ever-changing, but they are not separate from the ocean. They are temporary shapes that the ocean takes. In the same way, all your spiritual experiences are temporary shapes that consciousness takes. They are not more spiritual than ordinary consciousness. They are just more dramatic. Most people chase these dramatic states because they seem to prove that awakening is real and happening. But awakening is not an experience that you have. Awakening is what you are. It does not come and go because it never left. It is not a special state because it is present in all states. It is not something you achieve because you are already it. When you stop trying to collect spiritual experiences and start resting as the awareness in which all experiences arise, something much more ordinary and much more extraordinary becomes available. The simple fact of being aware right here, right now, without any need for it to be special or different than it is. Now we come to the part that most spiritual teachers prefer not to mention in their brochures. There is a phase in every genuine awakening process that feels like everything is going terribly wrong. Your spiritual practices stop working. Your insights feel meaningless. Your teacher seems like a fraud. God appears to have left the building, and you are alone in a darkness that feels deeper than anything you experienced before you started this journey. This is what mystics have traditionally called the dark night of the soul. And it is not optional. It is not a sign that you are doing something wrong or that you should try harder or find a better technique. It is actually a sign that the awakening process is working exactly as it should. But most people do not understand this, and so they panic. What is actually happening in the dark night is that your last attachments to being a spiritual seeker are being burned away. All the subtle ways you were still trying to be somebody, even a spiritual somebody, are being exposed and dissolved. The ego's final hiding places in spiritual concepts and experiences are being rooted out. This feels like dying because, in a very real sense, it is. But it is not the death of what you actually are. It is the death of what you thought you were, including what you thought you were spiritually. It is the death of the one who was seeking, the one who was practicing, the one who was trying to get somewhere or become something. The dark night strips away everything that is not essential, everything that is not actually you. It is like a forest fire that burns away all the undergrowth so that the strong trees can flourish. But when you are in the middle of it, all you can see is smoke and flames. You cannot see that something much more authentic is being revealed. Most people cannot tolerate this level of stripping away. They either abandon their spiritual journey entirely and return to their old life, or they jump to a new teacher or practice, hoping to escape the darkness. But the dark night will follow them wherever they go until they stop running from it. Because the dark night is not something that happens to you. It is something that happens as you. It is your own deepest intelligence burning away everything that is false so that what is true can be recognized. Fighting it is like a snake trying to avoid shedding its skin. The old has to die for the new to be born. Here is something that might surprise you about genuine awakening. There is no path to it. Oh, there are thousands of paths, millions of techniques, countless teachers and teachings and traditions. But awakening itself is not at the end of any path because it is not somewhere you can go. It is what you already are. This is perhaps the most difficult thing for the seeking mind to understand. We are so conditioned to think in terms of progress, improvement, and destination that we assume awakening must work the same way. If I meditate enough, practice enough, study enough, surely I will eventually arrive at enlightenment. But awakening is not a destination you can reach by traveling. It is the traveler recognizing that he was never actually separate from home. Every spiritual path, no matter how sophisticated, is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. It assumes there is someone who needs to be fixed, improved, or transformed. It assumes there is a distance between where you are and where you need to be. But awakening reveals that the one who seems to need transformation is itself a kind of mirage. This does not mean that practices are useless. Meditation, yoga, prayer, study, these can all be valuable, but not because they create awakening. They can create conditions where the recognition of what you already are becomes more likely. They are like clearing the windows so you can see the sun that was always shining. The pathless path is simply the willingness to stop seeking and start being. It is the recognition that what you have been looking for is what is looking. The seeker and the sought are not two. There is no one to be awakened and nothing to awaken to. There is just this awareness being aware of itself. Most people cannot make this shift because it requires giving up the very thing that seems most precious, the sense of being someone who is on a spiritual journey. Without the journey, who would you be? Without the goal of awakening, what would be the point of all your practices and insights? But this is exactly the question that points to freedom. Who are you when you are not trying to become anyone, including someone who is spiritually evolved? What remains when you stop the project of self-improvement, even spiritual self-improvement? Something funny happens to people who actually survive their spiritual awakening. After all, the cosmic consciousness and mystical experiences and profound realizations, they usually end up looking remarkably ordinary. They still have to brush their teeth and pay their taxes and deal with difficult people. They still get hungry and tired and occasionally grumpy. This ordinariness disappoints a lot of people who were expecting awakening to make them permanently blissful and wise and somehow above the messiness of human life. They thought enlightenment would be an escape from the human condition, not a deeper acceptance of it. So when awakening returns them to washing dishes and taking out the trash, they assume something has gone wrong. But this return to ordinary life is actually the completion of awakening, not a failure of it. Because true awakening does not take you out of your humanity. It reveals the sacred nature of your humanity. It does not make you special. It shows you that everything is already special, including what you thought was mundane. The enlightened person is not someone who has transcended ordinary life, but someone who has discovered the extraordinary nature of ordinary life. They see that washing dishes is no less spiritual than sitting in meditation. They know that dealing with a difficult boss can be just as awakening as having a mystical vision. Everything becomes equally sacred because nothing was ever actually separate from the sacred. This is why many awakened people become almost invisible. They are not glowing with spiritual charisma or performing miracles or gathering followers. They are simply living their lives with a kind of natural ease and presence that most people do not even notice. They have become so ordinary that their extraordinariness is hidden in plain sight. The return to ordinary life also means giving up the identity of being someone who has had a spiritual awakening. Because even that identity, however subtle, is still a form of separation. The one who is awakened and those who are not awakened. The one who knows and those who are ignorant. These distinctions dissolve when you realize that there was never anyone to be awakened in the first place. What remains is just life living itself, consciousness knowing itself, love being itself, not as high spiritual concepts, but as the simple reality of this moment, whatever this moment happens to contain. So what does it mean to survive your spiritual awakening? It means letting everything die that was never actually alive in the first place. It means discovering that what you thought was you was really just a collection of thoughts, memories, sensations, and stories that had no more substantial reality than a rainbow. The ones who survive are those who stop trying to preserve any version of themselves, including the spiritual version. They let the seeker die, the knower die, the awakened one die. They discover what remains when all the identities have been stripped away, and what remains turns out to be much simpler and much more wonderful than anything they could have imagined. What survives is not a who but a what, not a person but a presence, not an individual consciousness but consciousness itself, recognizing its own nature in this particular pattern of experience that you call your life. And this consciousness is not yours any more than the sky belongs to the birds that fly through it. This might sound impersonal or cold, but it is actually the most intimate thing possible. Because when you stop being somebody, you become everybody. When you stop having your own private awareness, you discover that awareness was never private. When you stop defending your separate existence, you find yourself everywhere. The great secret that most people miss is that what you actually are was never born and can never die. What you actually are has no problems to solve, no growth to accomplish, no awakening to achieve. What you actually are is the very awareness in which all problems, growth, and awakening appear and disappear. Those who survive their spiritual awakening are those who recognize this and stop trying to be anything other than what they already are. They stop trying to get somewhere else and realize they were never anywhere else. They stop trying to become someone better and discover they were never anyone at all. And in this recognition, the whole desperate game of seeking comes to an end. Not because you have found what you were looking for, but because you realize there was never anyone looking for anything. There is just this eternal, ever-present awareness, playing at being you, playing at forgetting itself, playing at remembering itself, playing at seeking and finding and losing and seeking again. The game continues, but now you know it is just a game, and that makes all the difference.